Hello everyone, I'm Robert Hall from the Port Phillip and Westernport Catchment Management Authority, and I'd like to welcome you all here this afternoon. If you've joined us to learn how to be successful in managing your rabbit problems, then you're in the right place.
Excellent.
We've decided to run the session today because we know that people often have a crack at solving their rabbit issues, but then get disheartened after partial success. The rabbits quickly breed up and re-establish. Today's session is about sharing the steps and techniques so that you can do it right once and get real benefit from the time and money that you invest for the long term. Some contractors have said to me as recently as today that with the early autumn break, they're even seeing rabbit kittens out already, that the rabbits have been taking advantage of the grass over the last few months and are breeding. So this is an opportune time for today's session. Today's webinar, or perhaps I should call it Rabbinar, is funded by the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning's Biodiversity Response Program under a project that the CMA is running titled Deepening Connections. It's based around Darrawheat, Gwym. But with the virtual delivery options that we are now all familiar with, we wanted to expand this audience as far as possible. So welcome to you all. We will be recording today's session so that it can be available for those that can't make the time. So if you don't want to get recorded, just make sure you switch your video off. So before we kick off and I introduce our rabbit maestro, Mr. Tim Bloomfield, I might just start with a few webinar survival tips. Down the bottom of your screen, you'll see an icon that says chat. If you make sure that's available, and if you've got any questions, type them in there. I'll be monitoring the chat and we'll pass your questions on to Tim during his presentation. And then when it comes to the Q&A session at the sort of the last half hour, we'll go back and make sure that all those questions have been dealt with. And there will also be an opportunity there. If you do want to put your hand up and ask a question directly, we can make that happen in that last half hour. We will take a break between the main presentation session and the Q&A session of a few minutes. So, I should also introduce that our webinar producer today is Amanda Paul, and she'll help us out with any technical issues. So I'd like now to introduce our presenter, Tim Bloomfield. Tim has a long career in pest animal management and environmental management more generally. He's worked regionally across the state in Delp head office, running statewide rabbit buster programs, and for the Port Phillip CMA, and more recently consulting to local government councils and Melbourne Water. He's also currently a mentor to the Victorian Rabbit Action Network. Tim has worked closely with traditional owners in an education role about the impacts of rabbit on country. And that's a good prompt for me to acknowledge that this virtual meeting is happening on the land of, well, probably many traditional owners, given the breadth of our audience. And if we have any traditional owners online today, a special welcome to you. If it's possible and acceptable for me to channel the traditional owners, I imagine if they're with us today, they're probably thinking, and would probably ask us white fellas, when are we going to finally sort out this rabbit problem that we, I guess, are responsible for creating back in the late 1900s? So with that in mind, and with a big welcome, what do you think, Tim? Can we solve it? Is effective rabbit control really possible? Maybe not everywhere, but at least on the land that we are responsible for personally. So welcome to you, and over to you for your presentation.
Thanks, Robert, and welcome to everyone else. Very much appreciate people joining in whatever virtual capacity they have. In the real world, you certainly can solve the rabbit problems that exist, I think in probably 98% of the cases. And there's a very simple and easy process, but it requires some background information for you to have, and it requires knowledge which is available and which you can apply in the field. So strategic long-term rabbit management is about achieving this type of result, where you knock the rabbit numbers down and then you maintain them at low levels. The key to it is warren destruction, is ensuring that rabbits have no place to shelter or breed successfully. Rabbits breed above ground very poorly and very unsuccessfully. Burrow systems are key in southeast Australia. So we're going to look at a few things. Hopefully we'll cover all of these. And if I don't, I'm sure somebody will prompt me in some way. We'll look at the introduction of rabbits and what are the lessons we can learn from that, the impacts that rabbits have in the landscape, and importantly the low numbers of rabbits per hectare that can have significant impacts, assessment methods that can keep you on track as to whether you're achieving the goals that you've set out, and we'll look at those components of best practice rabbit management, the things that you're able to do yourself and how you would do that, the timing for those sorts of projects as well, what success looks like, how not to waste time and money. You might have done that already, maybe you might have, and how to minimise the effort and maximise the outcomes. See, that proves I used to be a public servant. What a contractor can do and how to select a good one. So let's dive into this. First, a little legislation bit. The Catchment Land Protection Act 1994 declares them as a pest animal, which means that you must do everything that is reasonable to remove them from your land and, if possible, eradicate. You can even get a permit to have rabbits. Mostly that's for not the European wild rabbit, but for rabbits which we'll call domesticated, sometimes, and of course for rabbit farms as well. Now, the introduction of rabbits into Australia, they certainly came along in 1788, almost invariably domestic rabbits and almost invariably to be eaten and not grown for that purpose, and they probably did. There were many attempts to release rabbits into Australia, and just as similarly as there was for birds, for foxes, for a range of other animals. The English were extremely keen on making Australia like home, and there was a group called the Acclimatisation Society, of which there were many wealthy squatters who were members, and they were also rather keen in making Australia home and showing to their brethren back in Pommyland that they had done it. Thomas Austin gets the gong because he was extremely good at advertising his efforts. For his 24 wild rabbits introduced, as it turned out, Christmas Day, 1859, they arrived in Corio Bay, and there were others who did similar things. They brought wild rabbits. The Mogg brothers in central Victoria were also successful there. Rabbits breed like rabbits, so by the time we get to 1867, Prince Albert had been invited to Australia to have a bit of a look around. His party shot 2,100 rabbits over a few days at Bowen Park. They shot over 6,000. By the 1940s, 10 billion rabbits is the suggestion. It's been postulated that was by 1927 we had 10 billion. That's quite a few. This indicates what rabbits do, and this is the bit that we need to remember, is the rabbits spread. So colonising is a behaviour that rabbits have. It's a social behaviour. Each litter, those males and females born into each litter will be pushed out by their adult parents and by other adult rabbits at the warren system. They will have to then go and try and set up their own ones, their own burrows, their own places to be. Thus, colonising, spreading, is one of the things which rabbits do. It's a social behaviour, it never stops. So roughly from Winchelsea and Central Victoria and a few other releases, they spread across Australia very, very rapidly at round about 70 kilometres a year. That means if you got rid of all the rabbits on your place, the likelihood of other rabbits coming into your property which is a rabbit-proof fence, extremely high. This behaviour never stops. Rabbits were definitely advantaged in their spread across Australia by our burrowing marsupials, things like bilbies, burrowing bettongs, etc., created opportunities for rabbits to fill those burrows, wombat burrows, etc. They were also advantaged by the early colonists who cleared the land, especially for their sheep, making harbour for rabbits in those piles, and making the landscape more of a grassland or open woodland, which is what definitely suits this Mediterranean species. So before we go much further, what we'll look at is what are the components of best practice rabbit management. And the first thing to do is assess the area for rabbits, find out where they are, do a thorough check, have a look over the fence to see if your neighbour's got some as well, or the park even. Look at what monitoring methods you're going to use at the start, when you're going to start your program. Maybe you're already doing that. Maybe you've already got a spotlight monitoring transact that you check. Maybe there are warren systems that you check to see how active or non-active they are. Ideally work with neighbours because rabbits will spread into your place if we don't all work together. These are the three things that need to happen in a best practice rabbit management program. You bait to knock down the numbers, 95 to 98% reduction in rabbit numbers. Otherwise, they'll dig into the burrows that we destroy in step 2, which is our burrow modification. This gives rabbits no place to shelter or successfully breed. If you just do the first one, bait, they will come back because they'll have places to successfully breed. Having modified burrows so rabbits cannot shelter in them or breed successfully in those burrows, we maintain our efforts with a combination of control measures which we'll go into. The first thing we've got to do is we've got to find these rabbits in this landscape. We can identify the damage that they're doing. You might be very familiar with it. One of the things that I do as a contractor, and I wouldn't doubt a contractor that you ring will do the same thing, is I have a look on Google Map first to find out where the property is, and I look over the years that Google Map can provide you for changes in that landscape that I'd identify as being from rabbits. Vegetation loss and the appearance of plants that I would suggest are probably weeds. Nearmap can do the same thing. Nearmap actually does it better, but you've got to pay a lot more money for that. It's very useful to speak to locals about what the rabbit situations are in an area. It's even better to speak to some of the old people because they'll know what's been going on in those areas over time and the methods that were used and why some were successful and why some weren't. Ground survey, look for what is there on the property, look at the things that are advantage rabbits, and then find the burrows and record that. So here's a little Google map. It's a property near Bulla. It's north to northwest facing, so you're going to be a bit of a drying effect, of course. The white spots on there are granite rocks. Immediately, I would say there's a big chance of rabbits if you've got granite. Well-draining soils are really, really important to rabbit survival when the survival of young rabbits when they're breeding. Soils that don't drain well means that the young rabbits within those burrows will die. But granitic soils, sandy loam, rising sedimentary that drain well advantage rabbits. You can see there, and I'll use the arrow to point at a couple of spots where we've got bare patches. These bare patches will be related to the rocks and later on, I'd say, related to burrow systems that are in that landscape. One of the things you can notice is the adjoining property doesn't appear to have as many rabbits. There's a creek in between, but I'll soon get across that. Here we've ground truthed it. So I've used a handheld GPS and recorded each burrow. This is a monitoring method. We'll go into that as well later. The white lines on here are actually where the excavator went and ripped and destroyed burrows, moved rocks so they could get the burrows, etc. So what I found on the Google map gave me the indication that there were burrow systems there. I ground truthed it by walking the site and then recording it with a GPS. There's a program which is called Feral Scan, an app, I should say, that you can download. And in Feral Scan, there's another app, I suppose. It's called Rabbit Scan, and you can record rabbit burrows on those, and you can record the treatment that you did as well. It's free. You can do it on any phone, obviously, that has a GPS. There are other GPS configurations that you can get on phones, but Rabbit Scan's quite a good one, and you can set that up so you can share it in your group or in your family or in your land care group, etc., and only you see those results. So when we're on the ground, one of the things that I see, and I'm sure you see it as well, and maybe you've realised what it is rabbit graze lines. So here on the top left is some casuarinas, and rabbits have grazed that to the height that a rabbit can get to if it stands on its hind legs. There's also no seedlings of these plants or younger plants available in that landscape. It indicates to me probably that rabbits have eaten those. We see scratchings and diggings. This is a common rabbit behaviour. Part of their territorial behaviours is dung piles. So rabbits do about 8 to 15 pellets in any trip to the dung heap, and can do 500 or 200 to 300 pellets per day. So it's a territorial marker. It's saying to other rabbits, I'm here. Thus, that's the reason why they only do a few pellets every time, because they're scenting around the area, around the warren system, around the burrow where they are. This is to warn other rabbits that this is my spot, not yours. There's a warren system there on the bottom right. The rabbit sitting just in the front of that second burrow. Burrow systems are another thing that you can use for monitoring as well, and we'll go into that. Rabbit impacts. Now I'll just do a few things on rabbit impacts, which is another way, of course, that you can assess rabbit damage. And one of those things you could do is you could say, well, I would have got X amount of ton of wheat off this, or actually I'm not sure whether it's wheat or barley, but anyway, but I've lost so many square meters of it, or so many hectares of it because of rabbits. The rabbits are over here living in this apple Sodom. They're removing this and resulting in weed invasion. So colonising plants are coming in. There's soil loss, and there's an increased cost. And if this is your neighbour and that's your crop, I suspect you wouldn't be terribly happy about that. Rabbit impacts on pasture are also another cost, and this little experiment done by Dave Croft in New South Wales with 0 rabbits a hectare and 72 rabbits a hectare over a 2-year period, what we see has occurred is that the viable and useful grasses that have been eaten by rabbits. Rabbits preferentially graze those plants that provide highest protein levels, and those plants that provide the least, they avoid until they've eaten out all of the good stuff. And what's happened here is that other weeds and barley grasses have come in into that pasture. It might then mean, given that rabbits will feed in 3 to 6 hours 150 to 500 grams of food, we look at 150 grams and 10 rabbits, 365 days, we've got 1.5 big bales of hay that you have lost. Maybe now you have to bring it in. If you bring in hay, you often bring in weeds. And rabbits are excellent at spreading weeds. So endosynchronous weed spread, if I've spelt that right. Rabbits can spread up to 500 seeds per day. Mediterranean plants are particularly good at spreading those. They go through the gut of the rabbit and come out the other end, highly viable. Given that a lot of our weed species are Mediterranean species, there's this wonderful link between the Mediterranean rabbits and weeds. That disturbance created by rabbits enables things like spiny woody weeds, boxthorn, gorse, blackberry, briars to grow. That then provides cover for rabbits because predators can't get to them. That gives rabbits time to dig and create burrow systems, even in those cracking clays and clay-derived soils, which are generally not ideal for rabbits. But when they have cover like spiny woody weeds, you will get warren systems under them. The rabbits in this situation has also created the opportunity for the charlock to grow and some asparagoides as well. So we get this ongoing cycle of rabbits, disturbance, weed spread, harvest such as spiny woody weeds, cover for rabbits, burrow systems, more disturbance, more woody weed spread. Rabbits will eat the hips of or fruit off the boxthorn and spread it really quite well. The impacts on native vegetation, and this is very important if what you're trying to do is to maintain areas of native vegetation that you've got or re-establish some. The research shows that low numbers of rabbits have an ongoing effect. High numbers of rabbits obviously have a quite devastating and significant effect. Yet low numbers of rabbits, 1 to 3 per hectare, stop quite a significant number of native species. Rabbits preferentially graze alocasuarinas and colitrises, wattles, sometimes even eucalypts. They then have created disturbance for our weeds, and we get into this cycle of native plants not being able to re-establish and weeds becoming very established in those areas. Now, rabbit damage on seedlings is absolutely immediate. So in a trial that was run at Ingliston near Balan, we looked at, along with some good people from Arthur Ryler Institute and the great Steve McPhee and Brad Spear, we looked at what's the impact of rabbits when you put seedlings in the ground near burrow systems. In other words, let's replicate what isn't happening in the landscape with seeds. Let's look at what happens with a seedling. And it happened within hours. By the time it was dark, rabbits had chopped off eucalypts. They had pulled out alocasuarinas out of the ground, and this damage is such that the landscape will change because of the behaviour of rabbits consuming what could have grown. So here's another little example of the same thing. This casuarina was behind a tree guard removed on day 1, return on day 10, and it's grazed to rabbit graze height. This site would have only carried, there were 2 burrows, one of which was active, maybe 1 rabbit per hectare. Certainly the sign, the dung and the scratchings were indicative of very low rabbit numbers. This plant next to that one, the guard removed on that day 2, no grazing. What it means here is that as these plants become mature, this plant will not have branches that are low enough to ensure an escape height for small woodland birds. The landscape will be made less advantageous for them. A landscape like that is ideal for foxes and ideal for feral cats, hence the saying that rabbits kill birds.
Tim, if I can interrupt, you've said this to me before, but which meal of the day would you consider casuarinas reflect to rabbits?
Well, an old mate of mine, Steve McPhee, used to call them ice creams. They're dessert. They love them so much that they put a huge amount of energy and effort into finding them and consuming them. What will happen in time, and just similar to this wattle, is that they'll chew the bark on them as well, and things like that. So those seedlings will die. Now, in that particular landscape, there were mature casuarinas, but there were no seedlings because there was no opportunity for natural regeneration. The landscape was no longer self-sustaining with rabbits in it, similar to these wattles, where rabbits were treated and then rabbits were excluded. The wattle grows, the plant grows, but if rabbits had remained in that landscape, they would have died, an absolute certainty. So, hence this statement that rabbits are the filter through which all plants must pass. So if you're going to be doing a rabbit control program in an area of native vegetation, you need to have very, very few rabbits. It's not a matter of if we had 200 rabbits a spotlight kilometre and we got down to 5 and we'll think we'll be right. That'll still be too many. So when you define the problem that you've got with rabbits, you've got to consider the impacts that can happen with low numbers. Now, I changed computers, and that was the reason for the hold up, because this slide has managed to drop things in the intervening period between being plugged in and becoming a slideshow. So what it did have up here in this corner, it had a picture of a person on a vehicle with a spotlight, and it said a spotlight as an assessment method. So spotlight assessment is done by this method. You count the rabbits from the back of a vehicle usually, and you count the number of rabbits you see every 500 metres, and then you add that together to get the number of rabbits you see per kilometre. You then get a measure of rabbit numbers on a transect, which has been going on for probably more than 60 years. So there's a whole lot of information, historic information. It's quite useful for you to get an idea of the sorts of changes that might have occurred in your area. Now, what would have been on this slide is it would have showed a comparison between results in 2012, 2014. And what it showed is that in segments, and you may or may not be able to see it, segments 23 and 24 still had the same number of rabbits 2 years later, even after a program had been run. And that means something has gone wrong there. So the purpose of a transect, the purpose of this line through the landscape, this track that you drive through your paddock, is for you to be able to see changes in the rabbit numbers once you've done works. If you don't, then you drive to the spot where you saw that there were still rabbits, and you get out of the vehicle and you have a look. There will be a reason why they're still persisting there. That's the purpose of the transect. It will also change. The transect can also be used in your control program because it will give you information on the number of rabbits per spotlight kilometre, and then there are conversion tables for oats. There's ones for carrots as well, and for the number of rabbits you've got per spotlight kilometre, the amount of trail that you need to put out, and the number of kilos of bait that need to go in there per kilometre. These fellas here, Mick Fee and Brad, are weighing oats to work out how much they need to use per kilometre. They're doing it over a 100-metre section, and so if they were going to be aiming for 9 kilos, they're going to put in 90 grams in there, and they're going to run 100 metres to see whether they've got the right quantity coming out. And it comes out because on this drum there are these little openings which you can open and or close that allows the oats or the carrots to dribble out into the trail, which is made with the disc. You reuse the disc for a couple of reasons. One is that the earth that you've cut there creates a smell of fresh earth, which does actually attract rabbits. You also get the chance to be able to cover up any uneaten bait, and you know where you put the bait. It was in the trail. Okay, I didn't mean to go on for so long, but I saw that baiting. But
Tim, can I interrupt you again?
Yep.
If on my property I've just got 1 or 2 warren systems, so
Yep.
I don't really need a
Bait
machine
layer.
to lay the bait
Yep.
layer. Yeah.
Yeah.
How would I go about doing it by hand?
Well, that'd be fairly simple, Rob. You could use something like a mattock. You can use a shovel as well. You could use a hoe, and effectively you just recreate what we've got there before. Whoops. Let me go back to it. There. You just recreate this with your hoe, with your mattock, drag it along the ground, and then all of these products. So there's 2 bait materials. One's called 1080 and the other called Pindone. They all come in buckets. Chopped carrot or oats, the grain oats. You walk along there, put a glove on, you walk along there and just dribble it into the trail. And you can measure that as well, just the same way. Do 10 metres and work out how many grams you need to put out for that. And put it in the area where the rabbits are feeding. And that's really just observing as to where those scratches and dung heaps are and where it is that they finish. And you should see some change in the grass as well between them.
So I shouldn't put it right next to the burrows, is that right?
No, if rabbits are highly neophobic and in any population, there's some that are even more neophobic than the least neophobic. So if you put it at the face of the burrow, you put it in the burrow, they will jump over it. Even if the landscape's turned to dust, their neophobic behaviour results in them not consuming the bait. If you put it roughly, rabbits feed about 25 metres from the burrow, so or warren system, and you usually see some change in the vegetation where they've stopped going out from. Yeah. Okay, so here's a couple of, I'll just do a few other assessment methods because these are fairly simple and fairly easy to do. And spotlighting, of course, it's got to be done at night, and there's not a whole lot of people who are willing to volunteer to go spotlight in July. But this method you can do in the daylight, anywhere at all, and it's very efficient. It uses a booklet designed by Brian Cook, Greg Mutzi, Steve McPhee, Quentin Hart, I think. And you look for damage, so that's that grey sign. You look for the lack of or the presence of seedlings, and you look for dung. Now, we've got absolutely a rabbit will put dung down every day, multiple times, and they use it, as I said before, as an indication of territory, and so they're putting it where other rabbits are putting it as well. So the closeness of dung heaps is an indication of the number of rabbits that you've got per hectare. And I can assure you, if there are very few rabbits, there'll be few dung heaps. But if you've got 30 or 40 rabbits a hectare, you won't be able to take more than 1 or 2 steps and you find the next dung heap. And this is the process. I won't go through all of this, but it's the rabbit abundance score 0 to 5, seedling abundance 0 to 5, rabbit damage 0 to 5. That's put into a table, and then you get whether you should take action or not. Now, one of the things this does give us is it gives us, based on 0 is no rabbits and 5 is large numbers of dung heaps very close together, it gives us the number of rabbits per hectare that we're dealing with. Okay.
I'll send out a link to that rapid rabbit assessment guide to everyone afterwards. And Tim, just while I'm talking, a couple of questions that have been asked on the chat line is really around the types of bait, 1080 and Pindone, and their effects on native animals and raptors in particular.
Righto. So the product Pindone was introduced in trials in WA because there was a belief that they might be able to use this product, which is an anticoagulant. So it requires multiple feeds, and that sheep might be much less affected by it than rabbits, which were known to be affected by pindone. That proved to be false. The WA researchers in time got to the point where they said pindone should not be used in the presence of native animals. That was their statement. The product 1080, or sodium monofluoroacetate, which was developed in the 40s, late 40s and 50s, and it is actually product number 1080, but it has within it a product which is very similar to what's in a range of native shrub species, the oxaloban species. I might have got that wrong, that word. And hence, it is the case that in Australia, Australian native species are less impacted by poisons such as 1080 than they are by poisons such as pindone. My preference would be to use 1080. Pindone was developed and designed in time for peri-urban areas. It has an antidote, and that antidote can be applied to the species that we're trying to protect in those peri-urban areas, which is dogs. That was its purpose. It was not to be used in parks. It was not to be used in rural areas. 1080, which has been trialled extensively, is the safest product to use. And in regard to birds of prey, it's more dangerous to use pindone than it is to use 1080. 1080 would require multiple carcasses to be consumed by adult eagles in order to have an impact. Now, you have a control over that because you can control whether carcasses are on the ground or not. And it's part of the baiting program that after toxic bait is put out, you need to collect the carcasses, the dead rabbits that have died. And with 1080, that's actually a legislative requirement that you must do that within 4 days of having laid the bait. So my preference, Robert, it's a long answer, isn't it? My preference is to use 1080 because it is safer, it is proven to be safer, and my preference is not to use pindone. If you have to, then you need to be careful in the way in which it's laid and ensure that the bait is close to and where rabbits are feeding, and you should take some time to observe whether that's the case. Anything more there, Robert?
Thanks for the moment, Tim.
Okay, so let's move on. I'll push the wheel the right way. So the assessment methods. So this assessment method is very simple. You look at where the burrows are and you look at whether the burrow is being used by rabbits or not. So you can create a little index of active and non-active. It's been suggested that if you have a burrow which is open, at some point in time, rabbits will inhabit it. The main thing you're going to do in any rabbit control program is stop rabbits' access to burrows so that they don't have a place to shelter and breed successfully. That's by destroying the burrow. This assessment method is to use a GPS, use a handheld GPS and record the number of warrants. And in that GPS, you can say there's 10 entrances or 12, or you can push the button at every single entrance and you'll have an enormous amount of data. Active burrows are burrows that rabbits are using and rabbits would use to breed in. This is the sort of thing that you get from that data. It's very useful for your next stage. So you've collected information on where the burrows are. You can then use that if you're going to go and destroy them. You can find them again. So that's the first thing. And you can work out that if you've got this number of burrows, and let's just say it's like the one in the top left-hand corner here that I made a little square of, it's 30 hectares, 7.7 warrens in that hectare. You can direct the machinery operator, whether it's an excavator or a bulldozer, to that site. You can download that GPS data into their GPS and then they can track their way to each burrow system. They'll have another person with them called a spotter that will help them find those burrows, and then you can download the data from their time in the field and see where they went to every burrow system. Then you can return to them. The key to long-term rabbit control is the removal of burrow systems, making them no longer accessible to rabbits. So this is something that you can do. In fact, I was with a landholder on Monday, and it was absolutely miserable outside. It was misty, cold. It was probably 6 degrees. So I wasn't necessarily that keen to go and map all these burrows, but he was. And so I set him up with Rabbit Scan, and he's going to go and map his burrow systems. Once he's got that information, that's information that he can use with contractors, or he can use it with his own workmen that do that job. And he can return to see how well it was done as well. This is a very powerful thing, and I'll thank the City of Greater Geelong for this picture. Thanks for this, Travis. Here we've got a rabbit exclusion site. So rabbit-proof fencing's been put up. Rabbits are not in the exclusion fenced area, which is pretty important to ensure. And so we've got a different picture altogether. This is quite powerful to use where you're just going to show change, or the reason why you need to do change, the reason you need to do rabbit control. So in this landscape here, we've got rabbit grazing height here. These wattles have died. There's no seedlings have come up. There's a good area of galenia here, ensuring that there's no opportunity for native species. Photopoints are ideal things for seeing those change. It's been suggested that ecosystems cannot recover in the presence of rabbits. And in my 40 years, I reckon that's true. Integrated best practice rabbit management. This recipe, which is bait to knock down numbers, burrow modification, and backup maintenance. It works. The research shows it works. If you deviate from this, you will fail. I've seen it. I went to a site where I saw it today. Actually, I went to a site where I saw it yesterday as well. It's a waste of money, time, energy, and effort. If you monitor using spotlighting or GPS monitoring or rabbit scan, or look at the vegetation that's there and what could be there, you'll see whether your changes, the things that you do in the landscape, are able to affect that. So for those people who prefer visual images, bait, that's the knock down the numbers. There's the trail there, whipping through the landscape. There's somebody on a 4-wheel bike, and don't they fall over easy. Here is where the D6 has gone in. Now, this site was actually near Bacchus Marsh. If you visited it now, and it would be 5 years later, you would not be able to tell that the machine had been there, but there is vegetation, there is pasture back into that site. Backup maintenance, here is the use of fumigation. There's a number of other ones which I'll mention as well. And then monitoring, checking how each of these went. Timing is very, very important in rabbit control. Most rabbit control is done between February and autumn, be that up to May. Now, baiting tends to be done during that period of time where grass has dried off, because we only have adult rabbits then, and we don't have young rabbits. Territoriality is broken down because they're not breeding, and they'll move away from the burrow system further, and hence they can get to our bait in our trail, and there won't be as many fights between the warren systems because breeding is one of the major factors for driving territoriality. Burrow system destruction at this point in time, which could be through this March-April period, is very successful. In normal situations, there's only about 4 to 5% of kittens that would drive the population from that autumn break onwards. So this is the critical period of time to do your rabbit control. control. The viruses, RHD, Mixo, have a suppressing effect when rabbit numbers are low. So research over basically nearly 20 years at the Victorian Rabbit Monitor sites have demonstrated that. And that is a very, very useful ally for you. Here's a little bit of data to prove that, some of the data that proves that this is the case. These are rabbit population numbers going up and down based on climatic changes. Here's a burrow destruction warren modification program. There was baiting, burrow modification, backup maintenance, and our rabbit numbers are down to low levels, and they've held there for nearly 20 years now. So our primary control measures: baiting, that's 1080 or pindone, oats or carrots. These are registered poisons, and you can only use registered poisons for rabbits, or it's an offence under the Agricultural Control of Use regulations. Burrow warren destruction or harbour removal, and then our backup maintenance. These are primary control measures when they're linked together, when they're integrated and done at the right time. Other controls on rabbit populations: Mixo, really incredibly dramatic result. It was a virus of South American rabbits. If you were infected, if you're a rabbit and you were infected, you died. In time, the virus attenuated, which it means it got less virulent, but similarly communicable. It spread as well as before, but less virulent. The rabbits that survived, this is where we derive our resistance from. And so now we have less and less impact of Mixo. The same for rabbit hemorrhagic disease. We have less and less effect from it. The joy that we've got there is RHDV K2. That shouldn't be K2, Tim. It should be RHDV2. That's a mistake there. Take that K out. That's a wild strain. It also kills young rabbits. It's quite significant and may be playing an important part when it would likely to be occurring, which is in that sort of autumn break period as well. Okay. So we'll go a little bit into baiting. I'll try not to go too far into this.
Tim, just before you go into baiting, there's been a few questions on the chat around removing rabbits from more difficult areas like high conservation bushland, where the burrows are under fallen trees, or underneath graves in a cemetery.
Graves in a cemetery. That's
or where the warrens are alongside or underneath a slab in a house.
Yep. Okay.
Where there's lots of understory growth.
Yeah. So in the conservation area, the question you have to look at is that if rabbits remain in these sites, if they still have burrow systems in these areas, will this area ever recover? Will it be a self-sustaining environment or not? So I've used excavators to lift trees up while burrows are being treated. I've used excavators to move trees and rip burrows and then put them back. I've used them to move trees and then implode burrows, which some people would see as doing less damage. If the burrow is not destroyed, then what will happen in time is rabbits will invade that area, they'll set up and they'll breed successfully. And that's the conundrum that you've got. You may have to suffer some loss in order to have a significant gain. For cemeteries, so methods that have been used there is to bait to knock down the numbers again, is to fumigate burrows under the graves, and then to block those entrances and use things such as quickset cement. We use rabbit-proof netting, quickset cement, so that they cannot have access. So the thing you're doing there is you're not destroying the burrow, given its location, you're ensuring they do not have access to the burrow. It's a very time-consuming process. Rabbit-proofing the cemetery is a good idea because then you can ensure that the work that's done within those boundaries is secured. Under a house or slab, again, really what you've got to do is stop access to it. And if that cement slab is on sandy soils, there might be multiple burrows, but that's pretty much the only way you can do it is stop access, stop them from getting in there with rabbit-proof netting, quickset cement. You can use rabbit-proof netting that you can attach to the barge boards, dig it into the ground, stop them getting in. Rabbit-proof fence the property itself. Rabbit-proof fencing probably lasts somewhere in the vicinity of 30 to 40 years, so that's a pretty good return for your investment too. Now, we'll just leave it, maybe we won't go through each part of this slide, but the things of note is that 1080 requires free feeds because you're trying to get a behaviour of the rabbits, because as I said before, we have neophobia in rabbits, and we're trying to get all of the rabbits in the population to start feeding and to observe others feeding to consider that this is an okay behaviour. Pin down because it's cumulative, it requires multiple feeds of the toxin. Most people, no, not most, some people don't do any free feeds. They just do the poison feeds because no rabbits are likely to die from the first feed, so it acts like a free feed. But I'm inclined to do a free feed and similar to 1080 use of that. Free feeds gives you the opportunity to see where the rabbits are taking the bait, where you put the trail. You may have put the trail in the wrong spot. You may have not put out enough bait. You might notice non-targets. You might have to change your baiting behaviours. So anyway, we'll move on from that. Here you'll see a bait trail, and here's the burrow system. If we put the bait right here where our rabbit and our Patterson's curse lies, I would have jumped over it. Here what's occurring is the rabbits have gone out to the trail, they're fed on it, and this rabbit, given its age, given the quantity of food that it ate, died right there next to the burrow. So this photo was taken because I was going around collecting the carcasses and had been there since dawn doing the same thing with others. If you ensure that all the rabbits can get, have got to the free feed, and by the time you've done your second free feed, they're all but lining up for it, then you will get greater than 90% reduction in the rabbit numbers, perhaps 95, even 98%. Here's a picture of where bait trails are in a landscape related to warren systems, and what you've got to do is ensure that you have sufficient trail for all rabbits to be able to find the trail and feed. Otherwise, they won't, and if they don't, they'll still be there. Burrow modification, that's usually the use of machinery to ensure that the whole of the burrow is collapsed, that the tine is above, through and below the burrow. If you don't do this, the rabbits can dig back into the burrow system and re-establish. And that will both be a significant cost, and at times it results in people thinking, well, you can't beat them, but you can if you use the correct methods at the correct time. So this is a specialist skill. Now, if you happen to have a couple of bulldozers at home, maybe you drive them a lot and you're good at it. Otherwise, you need to get a person who does this, not somebody who uses a bulldozer for making roads, somebody who has experience and knowledge in burrow destruction using excavators or bulldozers. They need to have knowledge. It takes rabbits quite a significant time to redig burrow systems, and large warren systems have been there for generations. 15, 20, 30, 40 years. Those complex burrow systems are very, very successful in breeding new rabbits. This is what is under the ground. Burrow systems will be complex. The depth of the burrow system will vary, and it will vary on the basis of whether there's rock under there or whether and where the water table is. For rabbits to survive, for young rabbits to survive, the soils must drain well. If the rabbits dug a burrow onto clay that doesn't drain well, then what will happen is that they'll die in there. They'll die from hypothermia. Thus, burrow system depth is significantly impacted on by water tables. Here, in this situation, they're 300 to 450 mils, which means the tine needs to be no less than 500, but it'd be better if it was 600 mil. They're up to 3 metres from entrances. I've seen them up to 4 metres from the entrance. So this means that the burrow modification needs to be wide, significant width from the burrow or warren, and at the right depth. Now, if you try and pull a steel tine through the ground, you need horsepower. Your grey Fugi won't do it. You need the horsepower that a 20-tonne, 30-tonne excavator, a D6, a D9 has. Otherwise, you'll just scrape the top of the burrows and they'll be dug back into relatively quickly. Here's what happened over a period of time where the surface harbour was removed. So some of that was spiny woody weeds, and some of that was tea tree, some of that was non-endemic native species, some of that was cypress. That impacted the rabbit populations. They went from about 200 per spotlight a kilometre down to around about 20. But it was when the baiting occurred and the burrows were destroyed with tines and machines that were the right size, done at the right time of the year, the numbers dropped down to 1 to 2 per spotlight kilometre, and then backup maintenance has maintained them at that. Here's a couple of other sites, part of the rabbit monitor sites across Victoria and Mirraborough. We see this cyclic behaviour here of rabbit numbers related almost invariably to climate. Did it rain? Was it green? Did rabbits breed? And here, rabbit hemorrhagic disease came in, burrows were ripped, and then rabbit numbers have been maintained at low levels because the burrow systems aren't there and the viruses are suppressing them. Same things happen there at Skipton as well. So this statement is a statement of fact as far as I'm concerned, because I've seen it happen in numerous sites across Victoria that previously were extremely rabbit prone. This is a steep and difficult site with lots of rock in it, and that's why you need specialist contractors to be able to do these sorts of works. Above ground surface harbour, so of the many pictures that I've got of that, I've selected this one, which is gorse that's been pushed up with a excavator, and then they never got around to burning it because it got too much soil in it, basically. So that was the first problem. Above ground surface harbour enables rabbits to have time to dig burrows. Where you pile it up and leave it there, it gives rabbits an excellent place to live. So you're wasting all that energy and effort you put into the baiting, the burrow destruction, if you're not mopping up. The backup maintenance, this is the bit which you can do, which you can get a contractor to do. This is check, this is find out where the rabbits are at the first stage, find out what their impacts are, decide the goal that you want to achieve. I want no rabbits, or I don't want rabbits eating my crop. Use that to measure whether you're going to be effective. Use a GPS or rabbit scan or mark it on a piece of paper if you need to, where the burrows are in relation to other parts of the other landmarks in the property. Backup maintenance means that you've found a reopening, you've found where rabbits have reinvaded, maybe from the neighbours. You can implode those burrow systems. So that's the use of explosives, and that fella's got his arm down there to do, not quite sure what, but I think he's probably placing explosives. Implosion is also used in areas where machinery can't get. Implosions also, so it's too steep, too rocky, etc. Implosions also used in conservation zones because it can be quite a contained area that's treated, and it's also been used in cultural heritage areas and been vetted and agreed to by a number of registered Aboriginal parties. But I would stress that every time that you deal with cultural heritage, you need to speak with a registered Aboriginal party, and you need to consult as to what it is to get rid of rabbits and return land to country. Fumigation, so the only fumigant that's used in Victoria is the tablet fumigant, which is aluminum phosphide. Product names are phototoxin, fumitoxin, and there they're using a little smoky device, and that pushes smoke into the burrows, and then you can see where the exits are. Now there's a couple of other variations on that, but effectively it's designed to ensure that you can find all the exits and you can seal those. You can retreat the burrows with machinery as well. Now let's get straight into wasting money, time and effort. And one of those excellent ways of doing that, and this little segment of a graph shows 15 years of that, where baiting was the only method used. The result was that rabbit numbers never fell below 30 rabbits a spotlight kilometre, and sometimes were up to over 140 a rabbit spotlight kilometre. A lot of 1080 was used, but effectively it was simply a culling method because the burrow systems were still intact and rabbits simply replaced those that were lost. And that's because rabbits breed like rabbits. 28 kittens per year. Rabbits breed on green feed. They need 10 to 12% protein. If they've got that, they'll breed. If that feed is green in summer, they'll breed then. The peaks are in spring. There's a day length factor in that, but basically you can have all year breeding and all year rabbits in your landscape. They're independent 21 days of age, which is roughly about this rabbit, from that period of time, the adults will start to push them out, will start to want to move them away, and certainly by the time they've got to 2 months of age, it's highly likely they've been pushed out of the burrow system. Or if they're tolerated, they've belted up a lot. And the range, so this is some radio tracking studies that demonstrated that, but the map of Australia from 1860s onwards demonstrates that rabbits are very good at ranging across landscapes. Now we look at the Rowsley Valley and we look at what happened 2012 onwards, a start of coordinated ripping through the landscape, and gradually that continued. Landcare took over the monitoring because they do it better. Of course they do. And what we see here is low rabbit numbers. So they coordinate, the baiting programs were culling the rabbits, but the burrow destruction ensured that rabbits didn't have a place to shelter and breed, and you've changed the whole dynamic.
Tim, when I was a kid, I used to do some ferreting with my father. Is that something that in an effective rabbit management program I should consider including?
Well, Robert, when I was a kid, me and my cousins would go rabbiting using dogs and shovels and mattocks, and we'd see the kids with ferrets spend most of their time digging their ferrets out. We'd be digging rabbits out. Nonetheless, every year we went around the same sites year after year on an annual basis, and so did the ferret kids. You have no impact.
Okay.
You're just having a culling impact. That's all there is, because some rabbits will escape the ferret, and some burrow systems are just too deep, too complex for kids to dig out.
And so fumigation on its own is a similar
It has
result?
exactly the same thing, Robert, is that not all the individuals are at risk from that control measure, and that's why we have multiple control measures. That way we put all of the individuals at risk via the use of those multiple methods. And this little example here shows that active burrows have increased even though treatment has occurred, because burrows are deep, burrows are complex, and the fumigate which disperses in the Burrow system won't get to all of the areas. Fumigation is a backup method. It's not a primary method. It's a secondary approach.
So how old can a rabbit live to? How long will it continue to breed?
So the research shows that the whole of a rabbit population, all the adults can change over over a 2-year period.
Okay.
Rabbits certainly live longer than that, can live longer than that, and I'm not really sure whether it's 6 or 8 or something like that, Robert. In captivity, I'm sure they would live for longer. Well, potentially would. Good veterinary care, I suppose. Now, as a matter of interest, this particular site that I'm quoting here is rabbit-proof fence. So all of these rabbits are within the control program of fumigation, but they're escaping it, and they'll continue to, because the method's not sufficient. I mean, that's just it. That's why the research which shows bait, burrow modification, and follow-up works, because there's more than the 60 years of research and 20 years of the Victorian Rabbit monitor sites that clearly shows it. So you save a lot of money if you just follow the lessons learnt by the others who made mistakes. I've run plenty of baiting programs in the old days of the Lands Department that were not very effective, but knowledge has improved and we can learn from it. Now, one of the things that we do know is rabbits breed like rabbits. And in an experiment in Canberra, where 2 rabbits were left in a very large enclosure, they watched that, and in 18 months they got to 184. There's a threshold that you need to get rabbit populations down so they don't outbreed your control measures. And that's 85 to 95%. You've got to get them down to. And then maintain that. Another little secondary approach that we'll throw in here, and I'll use an example of a Maryborough site, which is part of the rabbit monitor sites. Heavily targeted by shooters, day, night, spotlighting, doing all sorts of things, hounding with hounds, a lot. The monitor methods at this site were spotlighting. So we've got spotlighting used as a secondary approach to kill rabbits. So the thing that will happen from that is it may be difficult to see the rabbits. Burrow activities was also used, so active and non-active entrances was also used as a monitor method. The spotlighting, so when they went and counted the rabbits in the back of a vehicle with a spotlight and counted the number of rabbits they saw per 500 metres and added that up to a kilometre, number of rabbits, 95% decline. So it really looks like shooting works. What had occurred is rabbits had changed their behaviour, which is pretty quick. You either change your behaviour or get shot, I'd imagine. But burrow activity on this site had actually increased by 5%. So we had a change in the behaviour of the rabbits that made them look scarce. Meanwhile, they continued to breed. Another approach is the use of a product called a rhodinator. This uses a mix of gases, oxygen, LPG. It's ignited, it goes boom, kills rabbits using concussion. It doesn't collapse burrows, quite certainly in granite, in sandy loams, in rising sedimentary, in very loose sands. You might find you do find in the mallee, it can have that effect, but in everywhere else it doesn't, which means that all you've done is you've killed the rabbits within the system. Some of the rabbits, not all of them, depends on the complexity of the burrow system. The burrows are still there. It's very similar to you did a one-off fumigation or a one-off baiting, except I'd suggest it wouldn't be anywhere as good as one-off baiting. Right, this is what we're learning. It's the rabbit that makes the warren, it's the warren that makes the rabbit. The biological controls, I just mentioned again, in regard to their impacts. So probably 10% of rabbits might be killed by Mixo now. It's getting less every year. Maybe it's 30 to 60% of rabbits are killed by the combination of the caliciviruses. definitely getting less every year. Re-releasing viruses when they're endemic, in other words, they're in the environment now and they will respond to climatic conditions and whether there's enough vectors, things to spread it around, whether it's flies or mosquitoes, and are there enough viable hosts? Are there enough rabbits that are not resistant to the virus to carry the virus through the population?
Tim,
There's
been a question asked about when the best time of the year is to put out the virus.
Yeah, so the best time of the year is don't. It's not necessary. The virus is endemic. In other words, it's in the landscape and it will respond to changes in climatic conditions. And usually we see outbreaks of mixo around about the time we see lots of mosquitoes appear, which is usually about that sort of December period. We see outbreaks of rabbit Khaleesi disease or rabbit hemorrhagic disease often around about autumn. And that's done with no releases. No releases. It's simply happening because the virus is in the landscape and it reoccurs. To release the virus, you would need to know what is the antibody status of those rabbits that you tend or you believe that you might kill. As my old mate Steve McPhee says, if you're an adult rabbit, you're probably resistant. Thus, it's simply a waste of time, money, energy and effort, and I have seen no monitoring that indicates that it has an impact. Absolutely none. And if somebody out there believes that they do have that data, I would love to see it, because that will be a first.
Thanks, Tim.
Yep. Okay. The other thing we can do is our rabbit-proof fencing. Now, that lasts as long as you maintain the fence, but the wire itself, there's an ad for Waratah, but lots of other companies make it. Double-dipped, galvanised. It will last in the landscape 30 or 40 years. The best thing to do is to dig it into the ground so that rabbits can't dig under. You can also lay it across the top of the ground and peg it down, but that has to be very thorough. There is plenty of information on the right size and the proper construction of these. Ensure that you know that before you bring in a contractor to do it or you do it yourself. You can spend just as much money putting up a fence that's not high enough and not properly secured to the ground as you can in doing it well. It will give you protection for rabbits once you've got rid of all the rabbits inside for generations. And the changes that you'll see, particularly for native vegetation, are significant. And if you're growing crops, they will be protected for a long period of time. Okay, so that's our recipe again. I won't go into that. When do you need a contractor? Well, I had an example of that yesterday. When I had a power failure, I thought, oh, well, I can fix this. And then I realised I wasn't technically able. And of course, I might electrocute myself given my knowledge. So, are you technically able to run a rabbit control program? I think you probably are. Do you have the time to do it? Is there specialist knowledge required? So for something like baiting, you need to have an agricultural chemical user permit if you're going to use 1080. You don't need that for pin dome. You might need specialist equipment such as a bait layer. You might be able to get that from the land care group, and somebody there or people there might be able to show you how to use it, or the land care group might run a program of getting specialists in to show you how to do that. For Burrow or Warren modification, you need mechanical equipment. You have to either purchase it or lease it, have the knowledge how to use it. Implosion requires a number of licenses, which you won't easily get unless you go through quite a few courses and spend a lot of money. Contractor, if you decide to get a contractor, the contractor should be able to do these things. They should know what best practice is and they should know how to apply it. They should be able to tell you the control measures that they would use, how they would assess what the rabbits are. One of the first things they should have asked is, what's the problem that you've got with rabbits? Because in the knowledge of what the problem is, you can find the solution. You need to be assured that you know that the problem is, oh, they're eating the roses, they're eating the crop, they're ensuring that I don't have a self-sustaining environment. Now I know I need to get my rabbits down to very low numbers to be successful. And I can tell the contractor that that's what I want to happen, and maybe the contractor will tell me the same things. So how do you find a good contractor? It's quite difficult to do if you're not connected in a local community. If you are, your local land care group can help. You may find the council environment officers are aware of that. There are professional associations such as the Vertebrate Pest Management Association of Australia. People that who work for Parks Victoria might know. As you would expect, they can't recommend contractors, but they might know a number who they've used. Speak to adjoining land managers, see what works are going on in your local area. And
one might even consider contacting your local CMA.
I reckon they, in fact, I've got them on speed dial, Robert.
Good on you, Tim.
And I am sure that they will be able to help you as well. Even the ag department. Yes, them too.
Yep.
Okay. We'll move to what's a bit grainy, references and sources. I think you've probably got a sort of list of information you can send out, Robert. Is that right?
I will. I'll send out a list of links to everyone with some of the things that you've mentioned during your talk.
Okay.
There's been a couple of questions that have come up, Tim, and I know we're over our initial hour, but we have been asking a number of the questions during your talk. But a couple of ones that we haven't answered are, what can you tell us about carbon monoxide as a fumigant?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's been some trial, a couple of years ago there was some trial work looking at that, which was to build a machine, let's just say like the size of a leaf blower type thing, which would be able to do that. They were not able to get the quantity of carbon monoxide out of the machine into a Burrow system to cause, to kill the rabbits, basically. So that program, I think, has been shelved. And I mean, obviously it works, as it would with anything that breathes air, but there isn't anything available this time. There is a product that's used for foxes, which does that, which is called Denko fume, but they would be far too expensive to use for rabbits, and anyway they're registered only for foxes. Yep. Okay,
and another question was around when you're putting up a rabbit fence, would you recommend putting in a gate for wombats, a wombat gate?
Now, certainly, obviously, that's the question is from somebody who's got wombats, and that is a good idea. Now, you don't just put that in any sort of old spot that you feel like it. You look at where it is that your wombats are crossing. You choose the site that you like the look of, or it's got the most traffic or something, and you put your wombat gate in there. They're quite effective. Well, wombats will learn to go through them. Rabbits will have significant difficulty in pushing through. The other thing you always got to remember is that wombats like digging. They're just good at it, and they will create other spots. It's been suggested to me that if your wombat doesn't use that wombat gate, it chooses another spot, you put in another wombat gate. Yep.
All right, and someone's just asking for the name of the fumigant tablet, which is phostoxin, and also whether you should add water to it when you're putting it down the rabbit burrow.
Okay, so the active constituent is aluminium phosphide, and there's a couple of products, and they've got on the label, they've actually got rabbit written on the label. So that's the one to look for, and it might be phostoxin, it might be fumitoxin. It's not coming to mind at the moment. Now, the on the label of the product, I'm pretty sure it does state on the label of the product you can do that. And usually that's done in a couple of ways, and one is the wrapping up of tablets. Often the process is usually 2 tablets per hole and treat every hole. Is that it's wrapped up in some paper toweling that's wet and that's placed into the burrow, or you use a piece of Aggie pipe, a black agricultural irrigation pipe. You drop the tablets through that, and then you pour some water in afterwards. Of course, they're well within the burrow at that point in time. There's also another sort of hand fumigated device that comes from England, but I haven't seen that product here. So the fumigation is usually done as our follow-up, our backup method. So it's after the autumn break. There's moisture in the soil. The fumigant tablets will start to break down into a gas when they come in contact with the air. If that air is moist, they break down quicker. Placing water on it breaks them down even quicker. So you can do that. It's not essential. And certainly in the current weather conditions, I wouldn't necessarily be bothering.
All right, thanks, Tim. I think I've sort of worked my way through most of the questions in the chat line, but maybe if there is anyone else still online who would like to ask a question or add a question to the chat line, feel free to do it now. I know we didn't take a break. We sort of changed how we've done it, but that's I think that's okay. But so if you've got a question, you just need to unmute your line and ask the question. Otherwise, we'll fairly shortly wind up the presentation.
I had a question.
You go for it, Ian.
If there's circumstances where proper control can't be done, is just the sort of secondary control, sort of that culling effect, is that still worth doing, or would it be better to, convince the department to save the money for a next season or something like that?
Right. So one of the reasons I've titled them secondary controls, and I stole that from others, more knowledgeable than me, is that they don't work. And a part of the issue is that it's very low numbers of rabbits per hectare can have a significant impact on native vegetation, if that's what you're trying to protect. And that means that the culling methods do just that. They only cull. They don't stop rabbits existing within that environment to such a level that there'll be a period of time where your native vegetation can strike again. Now, it is better to work on using the primary control measures, being innovative, perhaps in discussions to achieve that, but certainly being innovative in the burrow destruction methods. If burrows remain, then like the example of the casuarina on a roadside, where the works had been done, 2 burrows were left, one was definitely active, and I was told, oh no, I think we've dealt with those rabbits. I thought, oh well, I'll test this. And I pulled off the guard. No doubt somebody's not happy about that bit. And the rabbits proved that they're there. No, so that environment can't be self-sustaining. It's not possible. So that's the challenge. If you use secondary control measures, you will not have the effect that you want with many of the species, and hence your environment will not be representative of the ecosystem you're trying to recreate.
The benefit.
Probably. Sorry.
Sorry, you go in.
Yeah, I was going to say, so it's probably better to be more innovative rather than reactive.
You're correct. Yes, and I look, I've played those games and fought in those battles, and they're not easy, but they are worth it. The change in the landscape can be dramatic, and you're probably already aware of that. Now, I've done things like got exclusion plots put up where rabbits are excluded from a site completely, or they're outside of that, and then that demonstrates what the landscape would be like if they weren't there. It's quite powerful. Yeah.
Tim.
Yep. Yes.
Oh, hello, Jane Gilmartin. I came in late. I'm sorry.
No worries.
When I was listening to you with the when you're placing guards around trees, and I saw that example of the 2 trees. How long do you recommend a guard should remain for trees and plants that you put in?
So I'll answer that by this way. I'll say we should have got rid of the rabbits, destroyed all the burrow systems, so we don't have to use guards. That's what I'd say. For something like casuarinas and calitris, the rabbits are actually pretty much they'll never stop chewing at them. They'll need to be 2-3 years of age. In that first year, the rabbits will chew on the bark on them. So look, this is it's sort of you play a game of diminishing returns here to some extent, but you won't have planted one, you've planted hundreds. So when you take those guards off, you might lose 40% of them. You might lose 60% of them. But that might be what you factored in when you did your planting.
Yeah.
The amount you'll lose will really be dependent on the number of rabbits per hectare that you've got, and what the rest of the country looks like.
Yeah, we have a issue. I'm in a rural area, 10-acre blocks. We've got quite a number of people who are just not interested in managing the rabbits. So we are trying to do what we can, but obviously, other than fencing, rabbit proofing the whole of our particular block, we've just got to try and get these people on board. Is what I'm getting from your message. Yeah,
look, your efforts won't go in vain completely. If you've got no burrows, it will be, it'll take time for rabbits to re-establish. But if your neighbours have got burrow systems right next to you, then you unfortunately will continue to suffer from that.
Okay.
Thank you. Yes. No worries.
I've got a few more questions that have been posted, and I know we've reached the 4:30 mark, but we'll continue to go through these questions, everyone. So please feel free to stay online, but understand if you need to sign off. So one of them is, in a conservation setting, should one be aware of unintended transmission of toxins to other species?
Sorry, Robert?
A conservation setting.
Yep.
So I guess that's fumigant toxins, I assume.
Oh, okay. Yeah, righto. Yeah. So if you're fumigating rabbit burrows, the fumigant will actually break down relatively quickly. You'll have no fumigant there. If you did it in the morning, there wouldn't be any there at the end of the day. One of the things we do to reduce the chances of things like that is that we use it's a drain camera. Plumbers use to see where the drains are blocked. We use it in burrow systems to see what animals are in there in some situations, so ensure that we haven't got any non-targets. Generally, rabbit burrows have rabbits in them. Things like 1080 breaks down very quickly, particularly with rain. If you have 2 inches of rain, it will be broken down completely. Pindone, less so. you try to minimise those things by the collection of baits that haven't been eaten and collection of all the carcasses. Is that close to the answer or not? I don't know.
Well, a related question is by Sally, who said that she is poisoned in autumn, and is there any point in poisoning at other times of the year, say depending on the weather?
So when I said the best time is in summer, that's because usually you've got dry grass, and that means that rabbits are more likely to go to carrots, which are, they're about 90% water. So in warm conditions, they're going to go to them quickly. Oats, which if they're good quality oats, are high in protein, and once rabbits start to feed on it, they'll continue to feed on it, because here's a food source that they can find easily and provides an excellent meal for them. Doing it at other times of the year, particularly when green feed is available, rabbits are feeding on that green feed. And you have to try and drag them off by doing multiple free feeds often. And that may be difficult to do. And hence, the studies that were done on when is the best time to provide bait for rabbits, which were done in the late 50s and early 60s, went to prove that the summer period is best, that February through the autumn period is best. You just get much higher uptake rates, and so the energy and effort that you put in for it is rewarded in summer versus doing it like at this time of year.
Great. A question from Finch, who asks, do you come across the issue of rabbit burrows found in the areas of cultural sensitivity, that's 200 metres either side of a named waterway, and what is the best option for controlling rabbits in these areas?
So, yeah, definitely do. That's and on occasions, rabbits will have unearthed artefacts, so to speak, because of their burrowing behaviours. The approach there that works is to implode those burrows. Now, on occasions where that's been done with a registered Aboriginal party who have agreed to that particular type of approach, and that works quite successfully. It's more time consuming than ripping. It's more expensive than ripping, but it's seen to be culturally appropriate.
Thanks.
Look, I'll just add a bit on that. The other thing that's been done on occasions is those burrow systems along the waterway may not be the only ones that are there. So you've treated everything else by, we'll call it traditional means, and then we've got some that have artefacts on them or near them, and it's felt that even implosion couldn't be used. Sometimes burrows have been netted out, so rabbit-proof netting has been placed upon those burrows, so that the rabbits have been baited, then they've been fumigated, all the other burrows were treated, and these have had rabbit-proof netting placed over the top of them, so that the rabbits can't dig back into there and continue to cause disturbance and loss of artefacts. Yeah.
Yep, thanks, Tim. Can you say a bit about best practice when managing a rabbit program in an urban township?
Yeah, so the thing there still is to find where it is that the rabbits are harbouring. Where are the rabbit burrows in that situation? That's the critical factor. Are they under woody weeds? Are they under sheds? Are they under houses? You've got to find that out, and then for each system, work out how it is that you're going to either, one, destroy those burrows, make them unsuitable for rabbits, or two, exclude the rabbits from them, such as rabbit-proof netting around buildings or around houses, removal of woody weeds. It's hand-to-hand fighting when you've got rabbits in urban areas, and each individual landowner has got to be part of the program. It's difficult. It's quite difficult to do in those situations. It's also quite difficult because in urban areas you can't use pindone. Clearly you couldn't use 1080 either. So it makes that initial knockdown quite difficult.
Thanks, Tim. Angela's been having a look at rabbit scan and thinks it's just for rabbit sightings. Is there somewhere in the app to GPS record the active burrows?
Yes, there is. And I'm trying to remember where it is in the app, but I know it is because I have used it. I've used it to record burrow systems. I've used Rabbit Scan to do that. And I can't remember what drop-down box it was. But I know it has sightings, and I know it has, I think it has those scats. But there's also a drop-down box there for burrows.
Yep. Cool. When you've got a dozer in to rip the warrens, what's the benefit of backblading? Is there a benefit?
Wow, what an intelligent question that is. There's somebody with some knowledge. So what backblading is to so when the burrow's been ripped with a tine, you finish up with what effectively is plough marks through it. So these are little waves of soil that have been pushed out just above where the tine went through. What backblading does is that it smooths that out. And then that ensures that rabbits don't have, I'll call it a face to dig into, but an edge to dig into that's been created by the tine. So backblading effectively is also track rolling, which is another way you're compressing the site. You're compressing it so that rabbits don't have an area to dig back into. It's just another layer of making it more difficult for rabbits. That's what it's about.
All right, good. And we're getting towards the end of the questions with lots of people saying positive things. Thank you for the presentation, and it's been very accessible, so that's great to hear those comments. One of the last questions was, what about the use of bait stations in higher populous areas or with risk of off-target poisoning? Do you have any preferred design?
So, okay, that's it. So little things come up on my screen, little statements there. And I just know John Robinson just put something up there that Rabbit Scan doesn't show where the contractor went, which is true. It doesn't. You need a GPS to do that, and it will show you a track log. So, and I got distracted by that, Robert. So could you ask the question again? Sorry.
Using bait stations in higher populous areas or with a risk of off-target poisoning, do you have a preferred design for bait stations?
Yeah, so my preferred design for bait stations is to make them as big as possible. So a bait station that's something like 1 metre by 1 metre is useless. Don't bother. Use it for catching crabs. Bait stations need to be metres long, 5 metres, 6 metres, 7 metres long, 10 metres long. And it's because of this, because rabbits, as I said before, there's territoriality, but there's also dominance. And dominance means that the dominant rabbits in burrow and warren systems won't allow others to eat next to them. And maybe 1 metre, maybe even 2 metres, depends. That means that if you have a small bait station, only the dominant rabbit will be in there and feed. And that dominant rabbit effectively has to die, disappear, be plucked off by an eagle or something before the other rabbits are able to feed into it. So a bait station, you're trying to replicate what it would be, a trail would be. And so you need your bait station to be as long as it possibly can be or as broad as it can be in the area where the rabbits are feeding. If we don't do that, then it takes a long time to get everybody to feed. And you need to factor that in if that's what you're forced into is the use of a bait station. Your program is going to take longer. There's going to be multiple free feeds over quite a period of time.
All right, great. All right, I think we've got through all the questions. So if there's, we might bring it to a close there. So thank you everyone for being online and listening into our presentation. Hope you've all found it informative and educational and help you with your effective rabbit control on your program, on your property. And particularly big thanks to you, Tim, for a great presentation, and it's been really, really good and informative, and I always learn something hearing you present. So thanks to you, and thanks to Amanda for your technical support, and have a good night, everyone.